Hi, I'm Joe Trindo, President of the Board of Directors at Ernest Thompson Seton Institute. Joining me today and presenting our featured guest is Dr. Julie Seton, granddaughter of Ernest Thompson Seton and our Secretary Treasurer at the Institute.
Hello there.
The Ernest Thompson Seton Institute is pleased to present this webcast series, Seton's Descendants, Inspiration and Reflection. Ernest Thompson Seton's legacy lives on in his art, writings, and his values. Between 1860 and 1946 was a period of enormous global change.
Living through that period, Ernest Thompson Seton was influenced by unbridled urbanization and industrialization, inspiring him to learn, preserve, and educate others about our vanishing natural world. He also developed a deep appreciation for the values and customs of the first peoples of the Americas, inspiring and educating others to learn, appreciate, and preserve these vanishing treasures.
Founder of Woodcraft Indians and a pioneer of scouting, Seton focused his efforts on educating youth, and in so doing, continues inspiring the inquisitive youth in all of us. Today, 3/4 of a century after Seton's passing, his work remains relevant in our changing world. We have the wonderful opportunity for some of Ernest Thompson Seton's family to share their reflections on this great man's legacy. Thank you for joining us.
We hope that you too will be inspired to learn more about Ernest Thompson Seton and expand your knowledge and active role in caring for the natural world. The Ernest Thompson Seton Institute is dedicated to preserving and promoting Seton's legacy by inspiring curiosity and respect for nature and humanity in our changing world. Visit us at www.etsetoninstitute.org.
Without further ado, we are pleased to introduce our featured guest, Mr. Chris Brackley, great-great-nephew of Ernest Thompson Seton, who is joining us from Algonquin Provincial Park, north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. Mr. Brackley is the lead cartographer at As the Crow Flies Cartography and at Canadian Geographic, the flagship publication of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. Chris, thank you for joining us today. Chris, tell us a little bit about your relationship to Ernest Thompson Seton.
Well, I grew up with my grandparents. My mother's parents were Thompson, so I knew that the name was very present in my world. And the summer cottage that I went to for a month every year in Algonquin Park was bought by my grandparents Thompson, Cameron and Esther Thompson. And so I knew about Seton, I knew about his books. We read them as kids, and there was always there was a beautiful coffee table book about Seton that I would always thumb through to see mostly the images, curious about the sketches and drawings of woodcraft at the back of that tome, but I never really did get deep into it until later in life. So I had this sort of a bit of a fuzzy sense of who he was, and that he was connected, that we were somehow connected to a somewhat famous person. This was in my headspace, but it wasn't until I set off on a post high school road trip across the United States that I really was curious to know more about him. I guess I had read a biography that suggested that he had settled it down outside of Santa Fe, and that Seton Castle was down there. And when I put the dots together and learned that was probably still there, the fire was in me to go and see it and connect with it. And so at age 18, with a friend and a fellow we'd picked up at the bus station, we knocked on the door of Seton Castle, and Dee opened the door, his daughter, and she asked who I was and what my connection was. And as soon as I was able to point myself out on a family tree, which I swear she had right at hand, it almost feels to me like she reached over and grabbed the family tree and said, "Point to where you are." There I was, and in we were let, and spent 3 or 4 days just enjoying the space and the comfort and all of the artifacts. My goodness, there were things everywhere around. And that was an explosion of an understanding of the richness and the wealth of this person, and hearing it directly from Dee, of, you know, stories and tales about all the things woodcraft, to the continuation of his legacy, etc. So that was the fire, and really that trip, I was trying to decide what program I would go into in university. I'd been accepted to a wildlife resources degree at McGill University, and I said, well, animals, Seton. It was all swirling around in my head, and I went ahead and went off to McGill University to study wildlife resources, and I know that connection was there. I was baked into where all of that went. It wasn't long after that. Well, I suppose it was. I guess it was at the end of my university career. I was looking to do more engaged, broader work at the summer camp that I've been going to for 12 or 15 years by that point. And the nature educator had retired, and having done a science degree and being so interested in nature and all things natural, though really not a good student, to be honest with you. I mean, I was studied in the science through my education, but that sort of field naturalist view of the world hadn't been mine necessarily. And through a course on plants, where I had to create a plant collection and learn about the plants, I went to my beloved Algonquin to do that collection, and the world started to open up, not unlike Seton. Now, he was about 5 in the Don Valley when his world was opening up and learning about all of these things. But I was starting to identify and make sense of the forest that I knew so well from experience, from a lifetime of being in the park. But suddenly having a few names to attach, starting to see the patterns, starting to see the forests, allowed me to generate inspiration for an outdoor education program that I called Earth Lore at my summer camp, Camp Pathfinder in Algonquin. And it was a really immersive nature. I mean, it wasn't as directly influenced by Seton in a literal sense. I wasn't using woodcraft games and activities specifically. But in truth, at the very core of it, and I think when you go right back to where some of these ideas come from, really digging into nature, sitting quietly in nature for long periods of time, just receiving, letting it sort of flow over you. This was the very core of the program that I created. I wasn't as interested in games and activities, though we had lots. I was more interested in getting the kids deep into the forest to open their eyes. It was a 5 senses, receive the world, let it flow into you. And this really, for the exact same motivation I think as Seton had, which was seeing a world that was disconnected from nature. There's no question that his passion for reconnecting people with nature came from the joy that it brought him. He obviously had an internal drive that was unstoppable to connect with the natural space, but he saw that the disconnection from nature was a sort of a social ill that he thought could be remedied by more connection to being outside. And so, as much as, you know, his interest in Native Americans and First Nations people resonated with me at the deepest level, and I was just rereading some of his introductions to some of his books about getting outside. I think his view was that humanity has always sat around fires and been in nature, and it's been a very short time that we have not been sitting around fires and in absolutely integrated with and connected to and at one with nature. It's been, it's 300, 400, 500, 600 years, call it what you will, 2,000 years even. But for the long wealth of humanity, there we were in nature, and that there's something that we need to do to get back to reconnection. Whatever that tool, whatever that method is, was really, I think, a goal that he had. And organically, for me, it became a passion for me as well. The tagline for my mapping company, As the Crow Flies Cartography, is reconnecting people with place. And that is, from a standpoint of cartography, place is sort of a view of the land at a broader scale than a human experience. Place to me is home, or it's province, or it's state. It's a bit of a place is a bigger place on the earth. But that starts and is rooted always to me in a very real connection with the maple trees right in front of you, or the inchworm that's crawling by, and all of those kinds of things. That way of building a very human experiential connection to the place that you're in, and then broadening that out to see that you are connected to a world, a community, and indeed the whole planet. These are the kinds of motivations that stimulate me, and I really do feel are highly parallel with a lot of the motivations that Seton had.
That's excellent. His woodcraft, how does that relate, do you think, with your program? Is there a connection between the two, either overt in your development of your program, or perhaps consequential or unintentional connection?
Well, you know, the most amazing thing in my camp career as a longtime and very devoted person to my summer camp, Camp Pathfinder in Algonquin Park, was the day, 12 years on in my career there, that I found an old brochure lying around. The camp was started in 1914. And when I found a brochure sitting on a desk somewhere, and I looked at it, it said Camp Pathfinder, a woodcraft camp for boys. And I said, what? Because I knew what woodcraft was by this point, but I did not connect the dots to see that Camp Pathfinder was started with a route towards woodcraft as something of a model. Now, it was started by outdoor rec, gym teachers, I think, out of Buffalo and Rochester. I highly doubt it was ever a pure woodcraft camp, but that it was billed as such to begin with. And that indeed there remain some of the individual bits and pieces. The council fire remains at Camp Pathfinder to this day. Noonway is a classic greeting that is given by all Pathfinder folks. We sing the Omaha tribal prayer to close council fires. These are the bits that are still there. We are, as any camp would do in the modern age, still looking at what is the right way to continue on with his legacy, and recognizing that we are changing our views about how we can use and reuse Indigenous practices. So we're not sure where we're all going to land on all of that, but that the education is rooted, that the program has roots in First Nations connection to land will remain. We have a good contact now with a local Indigenous person of the Algonquin Nation. And we are working to revamp and bring that to a place that sits correctly in the modern world. And we're all evolving on that. I'm not sure where that's going to land. But to get back to Seton and outdoor education in general, the thing, I suppose, there's so many arcs to his influence in my mind anyway, true or imagined, I'm not sure. But one seems hard to refute is that I remember being shocked by reading the numbers that, I don't know when it was, 1906, there were 200,000 people or something enrolled in woodcraft, that it was a big deal at the turn of the century. It was a really big deal, something that is just not in anyone, if you're not connected to Seton, you just wouldn't know the significant influence, I suspect, in that first decade of the 1900s that it had not quickly, but slowly to be more sort of overwhelmed by the Boy Scout approach as woodcraft waned and Boy Scouts and in Girl Scouts and Scouting sort of grew. But the fact that is there at the turn of the century, and the fact that the summer camp movement, if it is a movement, that the existence of summer camp starts to happen. 1906 is the first summer camp in Algonquin Park. 1914 is my summer camp in Algonquin Park, and they continue on through the teens and 20s in great proliferation and throughout the province. This is my understanding. This is my world, and I'm sure that was happening throughout North America. But the idea that kids should get outside in groups and be in nature together for recreation, revitalization, all of the goals that Seton had, it's taken for granted that it's a thing that you do during the summer, but that Seton was a significant influence on the creation of that massively important to me and so many people camp. I'm sure there are scholars of the history of camp that may let me know about other influencers, and I'm sure there were many, but I doubt there was any one individual who had a greater individual influence on the growth of get outside, connect with nature. It's a positive thing. And so in a way, when I think about Seton's legacy, you know, I then, whatever it is, 90 years later, am able to invent an outdoor education program at a summer camp because the summer camp exists. That's you know, at the core of so much of it. My outdoor education program, Earthlore, was rooted a bit more in a 70s Sunship Earth. Steve Van Meter is a highly influential outdoor educator. And he had a vision of a distillation which really appealed to me in terms of structure. He looked at the world through a real ecology, and ecology wasn't even a thing when Seton was around. And so this idea of cycles and circles, of patterns of nature, of diversity as a positive, just a general conceptual goodness, of interconnectedness. Interconnectedness was the very core of the program that I created, that all things are interconnected. And this idea, of course, is baked into a Native American or a First Nations worldview to a greater or lesser extent. And it's certainly baked into woodcraft as well. But that was where the core of my program went. But I think I will always have a real root appreciation of the fact that the whole reason I could ever even do such a thing, that I had a summer camp experience, some real piece of that goes back to Seton and his vision for the fact that this was a good thing for kids to do.
That's remarkable. Taking a look at that period in which the proliferation of summer camps was taking off during the industrial age, what's the correlation today with the digital age? And in particular, what kind of impressions have you experienced in the youth you've worked with in the digital age as you brought them out into our wild habitat and had them experience, as you described a little bit ago, the washing over and silence of appreciation of their space, but also in terms of their interaction? What kinds of things have you experienced in their transformation today?
I mean, it's always it's a feel-good experience. I don't know what it is. It's an experience whenever you take kids out into a natural space. And when I would set up my natural outdoor experiences with the kids at my camp, was really rooted in one thing. I mean, I had these trappings of different activities and things, but in the end, it really came down to, we're going to paddle to the shore. We're going to go somewhere where there's no trail, and we're going to take a map and a compass. We're going to look at where we're going, and we're going right into the bush. And we're not really going anywhere. We're just going into the forest. If we go 100 meters in the next 4 hours, I would tell the kids, that's great. We're not trying to get anywhere. We will have a destination in mind with our compass, and we usually got there, a bog or a lake or a river or something like that, a cliff. But the point is absolutely the journey. And the intention is that we open our 5 senses and we receive as much as we possibly can as we walk through the forest. And immediately what would start to happen is a kid would say, what is this over here? Look, and they'd find a mushroom. They'd find a crawling creature of some kind. And we'd all gather around and have a look at it. I eventually got really less and less interested in naming things. I wasn't that keen on that. I was mostly keen on being sure that they were seeing something, that they were getting excited about what they were seeing. But what happened inevitably was that the kids would get excited about it. There was no pulling of teeth. There was no challenge to get them into going out into the forest. And I think you can read this in the very first account of the first Seton's first woodcraft boys and his outside in Connecticut, that when the structure was set up right and the kids were in the right context, it was a natural. There was nothing difficult about getting kids inspired to do it. And exposure and experience is the only thing in my humble experience of doing this that I think is a necessary to take kids out of a stuck on tech kind of a headspace. You got to get out, you got to do it. But it just was, I mean, if the bugs were terrible, it might be a challenge, but beyond that innate interest in natural spaces and the richness of it, it was almost always a surprisingly easy experience. And it's funny because, it's actually really pretty hard to walk through a forest in Ontario in many cases. It can be pretty thick. It's immersive to the point of discomfort, arguably at times. But not even that really got kids down. And we even took not camp kids, but school groups from all kinds of places, all kinds of backgrounds. And it was pretty much the same experience every day. I'm sure not every kid loved it, but no kid fought against it. And I think that basic innate ease with which people can reconnect with nature, you know, it just is. And I, as ever, hope that more and more kids get the opportunity to have an experience like that.
So following up on that, and thinking about my own grandkids and how they react to nature, although I haven't witnessed it myself. Do you think that the kids who may not have been as excited about it went along with it because they were with other kids and it wasn't being dictated to them by an adult leader? One of the things that Seton was really involved with was understanding the instinct that was particularly being developed at that particular age group, whatever that age group might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I take hugely from Seton's structural approach to taking kids into the woods, which was kids are in charge. It's their motivation. It's not a top down, really is a bottom up kind of a view of experience. Now, at the camp I was at, it's a canoe tripping camp, and there's no question that the canoe tripping structure remains quite hierarchical in order that it be safe. There are a lot of risks when you go out on a canoe trip, so that there's undoubtedly a different structure there. But I guess what was exciting for me was that I wasn't doing canoe trips in this context. I was taking them on immersive experiences into the woods, and that was an open space. And I really do think the idea of not slowly moving away, it's interesting because obviously Seton thirsted to know what things were called, to understand the structure. That was an early part of his interest in his education. But when I stepped away from, I mean, it's sort of a hybrid kind of view of things that he would have done. When I stepped away from telling kids what was happening, here's this is part of this ecological structure, and this is in this place in the food chain, and this is its name, and on and on and on. It was just, wow, isn't that, look at that color. My goodness, where does that color come from? That was my only reaction, which is to say, whatever you just did, Jimmy or Bob or whatever, is amazing. Look at what you've done. So it was really whatever their interest was where my support went, and that and my interest in their interest sparked the other kids to be interested, and on it would go. And it was just a sort of a fire of sharing, really, in a lot of ways that continued to grow over the course of the day while we were walking. Of course, we'd start to get tired and things would change, but that it was always the first hour or so that was just full of explosive finds. And I don't know, maybe it was the fact that we had a big gang that allowed more things to be found. Surely it is more eyes and more ears and more senses attuned to what was happening. But we used to find like full moose skeletons in the forest. We used to find remarkable finds. And I must say, I've been out with my kids a lot lately, and we haven't found all the things that I managed to find back in the day. So who knows, maybe it takes a group to really to absorb the fullness of a place. I'm not sure.
Interesting. That's fantastic. And when you say that, what's going through my mind is the trip that you took me on in Algonquin Park when I was after a very long conference. That was great. Thank you very, very much. And for now, I think we'll say goodbye. Joe?
Thank you very much.
You bet. It was great. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.